there seems to be a real tight union between the two, and this sense of communication through the most subtle of body language. And I'm impressed. I mean, I'm really impressed to watch it, and I feel very proud of Lisa for what she's been able to do in a short period of time.
I had gone from being a very healthy, active, probably overly busy person to being bedridden much of the time. I would wake in the morning and just feel like utter despair, just wanting the suffering to end. I have to say that, I didn't want to live.
It was frightening, totally frightening. I mean, I'd get home and she'd be laid out in bed from a really bad headache, and I'd be quiet, but I would also come up close to bed, make sure she was still breathing, because I was afraid that she was just going to die.
And I got a call from the barn that Arlo had been injured. And on the way, I didn't know what I was going to find. I thought, well, is he bleeding out? I don't want to lose this horse. And this was 1 week into horse ownership. It was a bit of an initiation, we'll say. But we didn't know what it would mean for the future. So I was born here in Rochester, and I boomeranged out and back a couple of times. First for college, where I got my initial undergrad degree in sound engineering and music, applied flute. And then I lived in Paris for a couple of years, in France. And when I came back, that's when I did my graduate work and got a PhD in clinical psych. I've always really basically had stray animals, or animals that would come to me in various states of duress, including my current menagerie of dogs and cat, and obviously Arlo in some ways, although he was a little bit more, we were more intentional about Arlo. I think that that's been a big part of who I am, just to be in connection with, these other species, and also with the natural world. So I think horses fit in with that a great deal. I could pretty reliably say that I asked for a horse for every birthday and Christmas since I could probably talk. Growing up, I didn't have a lot of riding experience, but we did have, my grandparents had a farm up in Vermont, and one of my aunts would get us on the ponies, the neighbors' ponies, and we would basically canter the ponies through the orchard, and we didn't know what we were doing, but it was super fun. That was about the extent of it. I think I did a day camp for horses too, but the intervening time between whatever the age of 13 and then 50 and being in a sick body, it's a whole different body.
Lisa and I met at a dance lesson, actually. We were both taking a Lindy Hop lesson. I was in an intermediate class, Lisa was in a beginner's class, and often they would need extra leads for the dance classes, so I got called in to dance with Lisa and took one look at Lisa. It's like, yeah, no problem, and did a couple of Lindy turns, and then we rotated partners, but I didn't seem to leave Lisa for that whole dance that night, and we connected later on that night, and a few more dance lessons, we started dating. Well, the dancing was a big part, that we both had the common interest, and it was something like a fun activity to go out to do, but I found Lisa to be not only very, very attractive physically, but just, the way she thought, and she was adventurous in a way that I liked. I'd lived in Paris for a while, and I thought that was really cool. Had really cool taste in clothes, liked to ride with me on the motorcycle, enjoyed going out to same kind of movies and restaurants and things like that. And it didn't take long for things to blossom.
Life before Lyme looked very differently than life now. I was super busy. I had a flourishing practice. I was teaching several times a month. Very busy social life, a lot of travel. I've been around the world literally a couple of times. I've been to Indonesia twice, and I was doing a lot of, I guess, following my interests that were linked to psychology and a lot of work with the body and perception. And then right in the middle of all of that, I became very, very ill. I just kept going. When I was bit by the tick in 2009, and I didn't really think much of it. I immediately was traveling off to Switzerland on another trip, and I came down with a couple of flus. I thought it was the air travel. I've always been pretty healthy, athletic. A few months after that, I started getting headaches every day, and that really kind of woke me up to something is wrong here, because I had never gotten headaches. And and then it just progressed really incrementally from there.
For the longest time, we didn't even know it was Lyme. I mean, Lisa had always had some back issues, but all of a sudden that became far worse. And it kind of spread to the rest of her muscles, just this constant ache or pain. Became just these debilitating migraines where she'd be laid out for 3 days, and it was about over 6 years before we knew it was Lyme.
Lots of Lymies will say what wasn't a symptom, because by the time, that we're dragging ourselves from doctor to doctor, we pretty much have it all. So I would say my worst symptom has always been, and still remains to be, musculoskeletal pain. I have terrible muscle contractures, migraines, I guess daily headaches, digestive issues. I got so sick that eventually, I had no energy whatsoever. It's called mitochondrial dysfunction, where I just couldn't, even leaning down to try and pet my dog or something just seemed like too much effort. So, at some points, my muscles would contract around my ribs, and I would have difficulty breathing. I was at my very worst having some difficulty with swallowing, with movement, can't hold my head and neck and spine up for very long periods of time.
And it was frightening, totally frightening. I mean, I believe Lisa as well. People thought she was dying, that there was some mysterious illness going on, and that she wouldn't be around much longer. And there was times where, I'd get home and she'd be laid out in bed from a really bad headache, and I'd be quiet not to wake her, but I would also kind of come up close to the bed, make sure she was still breathing, because I was afraid that she was just going to die.
I went from being, really active to being circumscribed within my tiny house, and just being barely able to manage life from there, and spending most of my days in bed. It was truly a nightmare. And in the midst of all of that, there had been some difficulties in my marriage, and so I left my marriage. We separated, and then I bought my own little house, and essentially just became severely ill, all alone.
Getting the diagnosis, I guess, was a mixed blessing. I mean, one, at least we knew what was going on. We had some limited avenues to treat it. But it's just nasty. It's a nasty, nasty disease, and it's frightening not knowing how this is going to wind up. As she was getting more symptoms and feeling iller from the Lyme disease. I mean, prior to us knowing what it was, it put a real strain on the marriage. There's other issues going on, but we had separated for 4 years, and it was during the time that we were separated that we got the diagnosis, but it was also during that time that we were starting to reconnect. I think in some part, working together, treating the Lyme, helped with that reconnection. We never stopped caring about each other, never stopped being friends. And I think initially our project was working together on going to the Lyme specialist, which we had to travel down to Philadelphia to do that, seeking alternative methods. We were both still into beekeeping and now using the bees to help treat. And through all that, just we were able to kind of reconnect and see the value in the relationship and the value in being together. And so it's been over a year now that we've been living back together, which has been very good. A little difficult at first, just reconnecting in the same house. It was going through that adjustment period, but it's been great. It's been the best thing that we could have done.
So initially, I started going to the doctor, obviously, and getting tests done. And initially, I was told, because of all the pain, that I had fibromyalgia. And, I was willing to accept that and work with it. And I've always done a lot of, not just cardiovascular exercise, but also a lot of dance and movement and yoga and stretching that, I was using, I think, to mitigate the pain and the tension that was happening in my body. And so I said, okay, fibromyalgia. So I kind of learned about that. And as my symptoms truly got worse and worse, I knew it's not fibromyalgia, because that's not progressive. And what I had was truly like I could feel myself not being able to walk, certain days with any sort of, like I was just in excruciating pain. And I was having fevers in the night. Utter insomnia. I had so much pain that I literally couldn't sleep. So I knew it wasn't that. I knew that I had to either, advocate for myself and look further, or just accept it. And, that just didn't seem like a good option. Finally, one of my friends said, she lives out in LA, and she said, I know a clinic that works with a lot of people like you. And so we found an affiliate of that clinic in Philadelphia. We went there and found a great doc who took one look at me and ordered a battery of tests that were a bit more sophisticated than what I was receiving here. And then we went and got the Lyme tests done, and they came back positive. You have to remember that I was bit by this tick in 2009, and that diagnosis was in 2016. So there's a span of 7 years here where I was just utterly living in terrible suffering. And that does something, to a body, to a psyche. And I felt indeed like, every day I was just living in some sort of torture chamber. And I didn't, know how to get out of it, because it was my body. I mean, before the diagnosis, so there's this long span of mystery illness. There's a whole host of things that go along with that for people with chronic illness, because there's a lot of shame and embarrassment kind of generated both within the individual and then in the allopathic world around, sorry, we can't help you, so it must be in your head. Or perimenopause was another thing that was suggested for me, which again just didn't seem to capture the range of symptoms that I was having. I became very despairing. And it wasn't even just from the reality of the situation. It's also because one of the other realities of Lyme disease is that it eats your brain. It infects your organs, including your brain, and it scavenges fats. So the myelin sheaths on your nerves are made of lipids, and it scavenges them. So I could notice like my thought patterns changing. I could notice a whole host of cognitive, neurological, psychiatric symptoms that just felt like there's something really, really wrong with my brain. And as a psychologist, I was kind of a meta observer of this, and, both believing like, whatever it was doing to my brain because I was living in it, and also saying, this is just not fibromyalgia, for example, or chronic fatigue. The pattern of my thoughts was being wasted away. I was losing memory. I was having trouble word finding. I was having terrible depressive waves come over me. And, I knew that this is just not right. But I couldn't, at that point, I would say I couldn't really get out of the hole that was, my brain was in. I would wake in the morning and just feel like utter despair. And, just wanting the suffering to end. I have to say that, I didn't want to live because my quality of life was so poor, and it just seemed like there was no way out, and I was getting worse. So I was thinking, well, eventually I'll be in a wheelchair but in terrible pain, and it was a nightmare. I don't even know, honestly, like what kept me going. I think it's just this part of me that was really tenaciously trying to find a way out, any way out. And after a while, I don't even know that I could find that part of myself. I just didn't know. I mean, there's a lot that goes with choosing to die. And so as I was facing, that possibility, it's just really hard to think about how to do that, and, and to do that consciously with, loved ones. And I mean, it's something that is very difficult to face with others. So, as you well know, I've had a lifelong affinity for horses, and I honestly don't think that I would have manifested my horse dream had I not gotten so sick. I was really busy, and as we all know, it takes a lot of time, energy, resources to have a horse if you're going to do any kind of regular riding, and it's a big relationship with a big creature. It can be challenging at times to look at what are the gifts of having Lyme disease, but I always try to, look at those because they're real too. So even though, I've been in a lot of pain, I'm still in a lot of pain, I have to look at what that kind of a big event in my life has also brought. So I knew that I had to find something that was absolutely intrinsically motivated for my heart. I knew, I had to have something to reach for or I was going to die. And so I talked to a friend of mine who had this beautiful black mare, an OTTB, out at a farm in Fairport, and I said, help me get connected to the horse world in some way. So she would, remember, I couldn't drive myself very long on certain days, so she, out of the kindness of her heart, would drive me out to her farm, and I would get out and I would, if I was capable, groom her mare and sometimes graze her mare, and then she'd drive me home, and then I'd crawl back into bed, and I knew that I'd done something really important because I would have the images of these beautiful horses, and I could smell horses, and it just really started to work itself into my consciousness in a way that I could tell was immediately good for me. So Izzy's kind of a special gal. She had so many starts at Finger Lakes. She had a really, really successful career as a racehorse. And here she is with her racing name, is her name. And so, she's a very forward girl, very beautiful, totally black. And I just really felt so fortunate to be in contact with her. She's also a really good girl on the ground and very nice and sweet. I didn't have enough experience to really understand how to manage, horses. So I was like, okay, please be nice. Of course I wanted to ride, but I thought that's just utterly insane, And I thought, no, I really, really want to ride. So I set up a lesson at that farm. And I climbed up onto this 17-hand, we'll call him an older gentleman, gelding, and I looked down and I literally didn't remember how to hold the reins. I looked down and I was like, oh, please don't let me fall, because I will, I'll just crack all my brittle bones and that'll just be Okay, so horses did nothing short of creating an utter shift in my consciousness. So, as a meditator, I was watching the pattern of my thoughts through all this illness and suffering. And once I started adding horse into my life, I noticed, that truly over time, there was a complete reorientation in the pattern of my thoughts. So, I was so focused on being ill because that was really what was happening. And then I started, entering the horse world more and more and watching, the patterns go from like the traumatization of ongoing illness to, oh, I've got my lesson today. How am I going to strategize so that I can actually get out of bed, get myself to a lesson, actually groom a horse who's taller than me, get on the horse, stay on the horse, and then, come home where I would have prepared everything so that I could just get back in bed. And it was literally like that for a while, where that's what I did. And so at the same time, I'm watching my mind, because that was all very ill, watching it start to like reorient. And we all know that our thoughts and our happiness have a lot to do with our immune system. So I was doing nothing short of, with horses, treating my immune system. I had gone from being a very healthy, active, probably overly busy person to being bedridden much of the time. I've always had a bit of a fighter inside of me, but I had to go deeper, and I really needed to find my inner warrior. And Rilke said, in the depth of winter, I finally discovered that within me lay an eternal summer. And, I never really understood what that meant until, probably horses came into my life, because horses helped me to find that inner warrior. And I could, mount on my steed, and my steed could ride me right out of hell. So I was taking weekly lessons, and at the same time, I also knew that I wanted more horse contact. I wanted to be riding more than once a week. My friend, Izzy's owner, had said, well, what about Gilly? And Gilly was a special guy. He was just so well educated, but also super sweet. You could really do anything on Gil, which is exactly what I needed. My body was compromised, and he, you could just walk, trot, canter him for days and not worry about a thing. And so I started half leasing him, and he just really brought me along, just because he was such a special horse. So I'm very grateful to Gil. Back in April of 2016, Colleen decided to move farms and obviously was bringing Gilly with her. So I decided to go with them. Gilly was really busy with lessons and other things, and I just knew that I wanted a lot more than a half lease. And so that summer we started looking around lightly, and then Colleen recommended one of the summer camps because they offer 10-month free leases. So I thought, well, this is a good way for me to really know whether I can actually take on this monumental undertaking of horse ownership. So we went out there one day, and there were a couple of horses that they were basically like the season's leftovers. They only had 2 left, and one was a quarter horse, and I was leaning toward him because I thought, oh, quarter horse, fun, big wide back, slow, barebacking, And so I got him, and it did not go well. And so I got on the other guy, and this kind of lean, older thoroughbred, and I found Arlo. When I first saw Arlo, I thought he might like to fade into the background and disappear. Like he didn't look like much. And then when I rode him, it felt good, but I could tell like there was something about him that he'd had a long life of drudgery. He's a thoroughbred. I know a little bit about his history from the Thoroughbred Registry. He was born in Texas, foaled in May, and then he was auctioned and he went on to race. He had 17 starts, which means they thought, well, maybe, he's going to do something. He actually won his maiden race, came in first, and then, and then was retired after a couple of years. He raced down in the South. They have the sites. And I know his dam and sire, and they were actually big earners. So that's what we know about him until, from the time he was then retired from racing until the time he arrived at the camp in 2014. That's a big space. And one of the things I know is that the riding director at camp had bought him from a woman who said she had rescued him from a bad situation. So obviously there was a bit of unhappiness in Arlo's life prior to camp. I was over the moon and so excited I could barely wait until the day we go pick up Arlo for the 10-month lease. So we go and get him, and I just was I couldn't believe that finally this dream was manifesting in a way that I would now have a horse for 10 months. So Arlo and I were, hanging out together for a couple of months, and I was kind of meeting the challenge of trying to ride almost every day. And then I was talking with the riding director and said, did you know that he was actually going to be 24 next camp season? She was preparing to leave her position, and she said, well, that's a lot older than what we had thought he was, and so would you like us to sign him over to you? And that's how I got Arlo for $1. Now, as we all know, there's no free horse, but that was really just an amazing thing to happen. I mean, then I didn't have to deal with, sending him back to camp at the end of 10 months, and he could be mine. And then, literally 1 week after that, I was working, and I got a call from the barn that Arlo had been injured.
It was very shortly thereafter Arlo becoming fully leases that he got kicked by another horse, which is, I guess, something that they'll do out in the field, and had a very bad cut under his leg, front leg, that he had severe bleeding. Luckily, one of the people that worked there at the barn noticed it, called Lisa, got the emergency vet out, got him stitched up. But I mean, it was, if he hadn't been found, he probably would have bled out and bled to death.
The farm worker said, well, there's a lot of blood, And so I literally had to cancel the rest of my patients for that day and fly out there. And on the way, I mean, I didn't know what I was going to find. I thought, well, is he bleeding out? How bad is this injury? I mean, I really had no idea. And I just kind of kept tracking my thoughts and my breathing, to be very honest, because, it seemed like a very long drive to the barn, which is literally only 10 minutes away. Once I got there, the vet was already there, and they had, given him some happy drugs so that he was nice and calm, and they were stitching up a wound that was 3 inches long and 3 inches deep in his armpit, his axillary area. And, I didn't know if anything had been fractured. Would he, then be lame the rest of his life? And this was, like I said, 1 week into horse ownership. It was a bit of an initiation, we'll say. It's hard to describe. My thoughts on the way were, I don't want to lose this horse, obviously. And I didn't know how life-threatening it was, just based on the description that I had, and just trying to keep my wits about me. And then when I got there and I saw them, working with this huge wound, in some ways I felt relieved because I knew he was getting what he needed at that point. And but we didn't know what it would mean for the future for him then.
Lisa, immediately being a new horse owner, was like, got right into gear. It was out there with the vet and doing everything she could to save this horse and also take care of this horse. And how he has cared for her as far as bringing her joy, she has cared for him, making sure that he has everything he needs. If he's in pain, that she treats that, or in this case, did everything she could to save him from this possibly fatal injury. Oh, there was a lot of things going through my head when I first saw that Arlo was injured, and after he'd been treated by the vet, and Lisa would have to go out there and change his bandages. I mean, I felt sorry for him that he went through this and was continuing to go through this treatment. He had to be on stall rest for a number of weeks, which he's a thoroughbred. He likes to be out. He likes to move. And to be cooped up in his stall, I knew it was driving him nuts, and felt bad for that. I felt bad for Lisa a little bit because she had to go out there, a couple times a day just to tend things, though she didn't seem to mind. And then I guess the last thing that went through my head is there's no such thing as a $1 horse because I think after the vet bill he became a $1,000 horse. But that's pretty minor. It's the main thing was that he was healing and doing better.
And then the next day, Gilly passed away from an illness. The loss of Gilly was profound. I mean, he wasn't my horse, but I felt like he had really helped to save my life. He had gotten me to a place where I could ride. And I know that Gilly was special for a lot of people. Of course, to Colleen, but to a lot of people that he helped along the way, I guess. So it was really sad. He had been ailing for several months, and I think watching his suffering for me was the hardest part of it all. I certainly can relate to that. I can resonate. We didn't know what was wrong with him for a long time, so. In some ways it felt almost relieving to know that he wasn't in suffering anymore. So after, these huge events, Arlo's injury, Gilly dying, I really galvanized and went into, let's get Arlo better, do what we need to do. I had plenty of help and support, but I was still very sick. So it was incredibly taxing to go out to the barn twice a day to wrap his legs and unwrap his legs, dress his wound, hand walk him twice a day, hand graze him twice a day to keep him moving so he didn't get too stocked up. This was a very different moment for the two of us, other than just getting to work every day. This was getting him better, and I could feel a sense of a deepening bond within myself, certainly, and also perhaps some deepening trust from him with me, because I was showing up and doing these things, some of them painful, rebandaging his wound, and the sticky tape that goes over. And he was a champ. He was really good for all of it. And I was spending a lot of time with him, just hanging out. I wasn't asking him to do anything like I normally would. And I felt like I was seeing more of his affectionate side. And one night kind of just nibbling and licking my fingers a little bit. That was just making me laugh, and we would have these really lovely moments in the midst of his recovery. Happily, his stall rest period was only 2 weeks, and then I just slowly started putting him back to work. And the first time I rode him was when the indoor arena was finished, and I took him in there and got on him and just was asking him for a really nice walk and then a little trot, and he tripped and went down. He fell on his head. I tumbled off over his shoulder, got up, and he was bleeding from his mouth. I felt so horribly. I wasn't sure, what was it that actually happened? Is this horse even more injured? Does he have a fracture that we don't know about? But I think it was just a combination of needing to recondition, and then the new footing, which is a little more dense. He wasn't used to that. But yeah, I felt awful. He actually came back fully, to the point where I felt like that was he's really literally been sound for the year I've had him outside of the 2 weeks of that injury. He's been quite sound. I think that because Arlo and I are in now, a long-term relationship, that there's something about just watching the bond between us. And, he's gotten more expressive as I've known him. Like he's more opinionated perhaps now than he was when I first got him. I think he feels more free to show me what's going on for him. He can be incredibly opinionated. He can also be super, quiet and affectionate. And, those moments when Arlo will turn his head to me if I'm in the stall with him and rest his, velvet muzzle right here on my chest. It's time disappears, and I can just feel my heart, growing like the Grinch on Christmas,
Never thought that we'd actually own a horse. I know Lisa wanted one ever since she was a kid, and now that we have one, I think we're getting a PhD in horse education as far as what it takes to care for a horse. Oh no, I enjoy it. I think it's really cool. Yeah, that's one of the things that really kind of impressed me. I think is just the personalities on all these horses, including Arlo. I mean, Arlo's the most because we're the closest with him, but I'll go out with Lisa to the barn and bring treats to the other horses, and they all have their own unique personalities. Some are a little more cuddly than others, some are more mischievous or just teenage goofy kind of. But as far as with Arlo, I've been really impressed just kind of watching how that relationship has evolved between Lisa and Arlo, going from not knowing each other to Lisa still being in the early stages of learning how to ride, and now watching her do dressage or go out in the field and gallop. And there seems to be a real tight union between the two, and this sense of communication through the most subtle of body language. And I'm impressed. I mean, I'm really impressed to watch it. And I feel very proud of Lisa for what she's been able to do in a short period of time. And just happy for both of them. They kind of found each other.
At some point along the way, I decided I might like to show Arlo just to have the experience. Now, that sounds kind of like an easy thing to do, but with my body, not so easy. I mean, to show up at the barn at whatever, 5 or 6 a.m. and have a really long, stressful day, my body is likely not to cooperate, and it's all going to depend on the day itself and everything. But I thought, I'd really like to try. For the first show, I just entered a small local show in the rookie division for people like myself who haven't shown, and it was super fun. It was stressful and I was nervous, but I felt like once I got on my horse, it was just Lisa and Arlo, but in, obviously different clothes. When we won the blue ribbon and rookie equitation, it was like so surprising, and it was just icing on the cake for a wonderful day. I mean, so many people came out. It was just really, really great experience. Even ribbons aside, I felt like it was probably, it's going to sound like an exaggeration, but it's not. It's probably the biggest accomplishment of my life. It way surpasses even perhaps getting a doctorate degree and some of the other exciting things I'd done, because I really had to go through a lot of hardship and also kind of meet my body where it was to do something that I really wanted to do, and actually have that manifest. I see, my experience right now is multifaceted, and I want to keep it that way because I want to, I want to jump, and I want to get my technique in dressage much, much better than where it's at. And a lot of it is because I just want to feel a level of freedom, and, that begins with safety on my horse. And Arlo and I have, we heartily agree that we want to be out in the fields, and we want to be galloping up the hill, and we want to be on the trails together, and to, do it safely and well. So, he's happiest out there, and so am I.
Yeah, the big thing I've seen in the relationship with Lisa and Arlo, initially I remember when Lisa started horseback riding, there was a lot of back pain, things like that, and it just didn't seem to make a lot of sense that you're achy and sometimes have problems holding your head up for an extended period of time because of just the muscle tension. And you're going to get on a horse, and it turns out that that's actually probably the best thing that could have happened. I mean, not only just to kind of move the muscles and get the fluids moving, but the happiness factor. I had some back issues years ago where I was in severe pain for months, and it's hard to feel that happy when you're always in pain. And there's a huge happiness factor when Lisa is with Arlo, whether they're riding or just she's just checking on him in the stall and bringing him treats, brushing him, whatever. And I think that's probably a huge factor in getting better. Is just having some happiness in your life, and I think that's big in the healing process.
I have a knowledge that bees and horses are helping me heal from a place that I didn't know I could necessarily heal from. So, I mean, my whole journey with Lyme is not over. I have made significant improvements, but I am nowhere near normal. I'm not at my baseline. I don't know if I will ever reach that old baseline again. What's happening now is at least manageable most days. And I credit the horses with helping me get back to a place where I can actually move around the world and do meaningful things. I mean, it's not a lot. Like, I have still a much smaller life than I used to have. have. In some ways, it's because it's so intrinsically motivated. I'm so passionate about horses. That in and of itself is really all I need. I don't need tons of other stuff. I mean, I will like to do some other things too, but I have what makes me happy. And Joseph Campbell said, follow your bliss. And I really feel that to be true. Do what you love to do. And, that is what life is. So horses have helped not just my mind, but also my body. It's not easy for me still even to walk my dogs. I used to be a runner. I can't really do that anymore. But horses, the undulation of the horse when I'm on the back of a horse moves my spine, releases a lot of the muscles that are so contracted. My muscles are still very unhappy, still number one symptom, but there are so many other things that have improved that, I can manage. And they've just made my life better. I, as you know, was diagnosed a little more than a year ago. So at that point, at least, we had something to treat. We didn't even know what to treat. And so now, even though Lyme is very tricky because it basically annihilates your immune system so that other opportunistic infections can take over. So each Lyme has a different constellation of not just symptoms, but of systemic illnesses. So it can be a little bit hard to try and figure out what are we treating here. But I found a treatment protocol. I'm now 1 year in to a 3-year treatment protocol that is holistic, a little bit outside the norm, but something that other people have healed from, and that is using bee venom.
Lisa and I got into beekeeping, maybe like 7 years ago or so. It was before we had separated, and it was something that she wanted to do. I really didn't have any interest in it. It's like, I like honeybees, I like honey, but it wasn't something that I wanted to do or take time for. And so it was Lisa's project, but being the home handyman, I had got the job of putting everything together when we first ordered her beehives, and it was just these boxes of wood pieces with no instructions that I had to figure out how to put all together. But shortly into the process of helping out, I kind of became the assistant beekeeper to beekeeper partner to in some ways now the primary beekeeper. And I've become fascinated by just how bees are as far as in their society and how they interact and how they care for each other and provide for generations that they'll never know. I just find them fascinating now, and Lisa has always saw the bee as kind of a symbol of life and just keeping things going for future generations. She has a lot of different bee symbols that she likes to wear or have around the house, and I just found it very natural, and it just felt right inside when we started hearing about bee venom therapy for Lyme disease. Here we have had, by this point, had bees for 4 or 5 years. This treatment was first presented to us by other people that were doing it. It felt like, oh yeah, this is a much better way to go than heavy-duty antibiotics that for anybody, you can't do that long term.
Ken and I were beekeepers for the last many years, so it was almost like, oh, okay, well, that's kind of synchronous. And what I learned about bee venom is that it kills off a lot of bacterial and viral and actually fungal infections. Those of us with Lyme often have parasitic infections as well as fungal. We've got it all. So in the lab, the Lyme spirochete was killed off by bee venom. So we started basically systematically stinging, and you have to ramp up, but we're now at the full protocol. So I sting with a lot of bees 3 times a week, and yes, it hurts, but it doesn't hurt anything near to the pain of Lyme disease, and it doesn't last that long. The sting doesn't last that long, but I can tell it boosts my adrenal glands so that I now have a lot more energy than I did a couple of years ago. That has been an amazing mitigator in my recovery. We know that it acts on the immune system. It helps the immune system. Horses are also doing that, right? Because I'm so much happier now. So I feel like horses and bees together have literally saved my life.
Doing bee venom therapy initially, and it can still be rather stressful because I have to go out and collect stinging insects, and we usually gather them in a small box or jar, put a screen over the jar, and pull them out with these special tweezers that we have. And there's always the risk of me getting stung, but I've gotten quite comfortable with the stinging process on Lisa, as far as how it needs to be done and where and when. And I've gotten stung a number of times as a beekeeper, and when I do, I quickly brush the bee off, and it's a little burn, but no big deal. After a run around the house and through the woods, found a deer tick on myself, which the deer tick is what carries the Lyme disease. We noticed it early on, we removed it. I went on some antibiotics, but as another preventative measure, I was stung with bees around the point where the tick was on me. And Lisa stung me with 3 bees, and we left the stingers in for at least 20 minutes to get the full venom treatment. And holy cow, I guess I didn't fully realize the full effect of what was going on for Lisa until that, because I was trying to tell myself to be cool. It's just 3 stings. Lisa gets 12 to 14. But I could not control myself. I think I was speaking in tongues because the pain was so great. And it makes me appreciate what Lisa is willing to do and what she's willing to go through to cure herself of this disease. And she's often mentioned that the pain of the bee sting is far less than the pain of the Lyme itself. And that really stays with me to try to understand what she's feeling, the intensity of it. With Lisa's health, there is a lot of motivation to get healthy. I mean, not only for us here at home and things we want to do together, but there's a real commitment to being with the horses. I mean, not only being Arlo's mom until the day he dies and making sure he has everything he needs, but there's a commitment to having horses in our lives for hopefully a long time, whether it's getting another off-the-track thoroughbred or Mustang or who knows. I think having horses in our lives has become critical as far as motivating factor to get up out of bed, to move, to whether it's going out to the barn or riding or just going out to visit them. And they bring a lot of joy into Lisa's life, and then mine too. I always enjoy going out there. I don't see that changing. We need to get a bigger yard, so maybe the horses could be a little closer, but I see horses in our lives for quite some time.
It's hard to really fully discuss, who Arlo is to me and our relationship. But I mean, at the very least, he's my physical therapy, my meditation practice. He helps me grow in ways that I wouldn't have otherwise. He challenges me. I have to be very assertive with him. That's been good for me to bring that forth. And it's really about relationship and embodied relationship. You can't, be a being of this size and get on a being of that size and not really have to deeply embody yourself to be with the embodiment of horse, particularly, if you want to canter your horse or, you really have to be in yourself. And that's been an amazing gift to me. So not only have horses helped to save my life, but they are helping to sustain it, and they make it infinitely better.
Since Lisa's been into horseback riding and becoming a skilled rider, I've benefited in some ways, because whenever we go on vacation, she'll look up to see, well, is there any horseback riding around? And this past summer, I've got to do some horseback riding on beaches and galloping along the beaches. Actually, this past year, we got to do that 3 times.
Hey, Reed. Say hi.
For me, who doesn't get to ride that often, it's been really cool. It's just to be on these horses and race down the beach, and be in an environment that I love, and to be with these very noble, beautiful creatures, and letting them go, and just sheer joy. It's been a lot of fun to be able to see Lisa healthy enough to do that, and be able to share that with her.
For me, having been a very self-sufficient little unit my entire life, Lyme disease has opened me up to my own vulnerability and to my need to have help. Horses certainly, rode me out of hell, but there are a lot of people too who have supported me. My husband is extremely supportive of my horse world and barn world, and the people who have mentored me. The barn community is amazing. This is my first horse, and I have a million questions, and there's always somebody there. The barn community is also a great social community. We're all equally impassioned about horses. We're all showing up every day, for the most part, and just supporting one another. I have felt an enormous amount of support being in that community and from people around me. And I also have to say, that there have been myriad humans who have helped me through the vicissitudes of Lyme disease. And, the doctor who diagnosed me, obviously that was a big deal. Even the people who figured out how bee venom works in the Lyme body, who would have really, I would never have organically thought of that myself. So, and then friends who want to listen and elicit more than just, what's going on the surface, and want to, hear more and truly deeply understand. That has been medicine for me. So obviously I'm not done with Lyme disease, or it's not done with me, and it might be kind of a lifelong process here, but I feel so much better. To be able to be doing what I'm doing right now is pretty amazing. I'm just very, very grateful.
whisper your love to. But today is about you, only you, only you. Today is just for you. You've made a change, stirring up the same in all of us around you, and that always makes me want you. Today is about you, only you, only you. Today is just for you. I love you, love you, love you, only you. Today's all about you, only you, only you. Today is just